our channel before. We're two homeschool moms who have come together, and we love to share tips with you. Please subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos.
We upload every Tuesday. So it's a new year, and we're starting our health series, and we thought that it would be awesome to start with brain integration and power. So we are here with Alma Integration, Dani and Alma. So tell us what you guys do at Alma Integration.
Sure. So there's 3 parts of Alma Integration. It's focus, where we just kind of identify what sort of beliefs and things are kind of holding you back from reaching your fullest potential. And then there's the Rewire aspect, where we actually go in and we integrate those so that they stop holding you back. And then we have the expansion part, which is all about integrating the brain and getting fully connected, so that way you are your best self, not living in survival mode, all in your cortex, just taking care of business.
So are you saying that we don't all have our brains integrated?
Unfortunately not. In today's world, there's just so much happening that it's taking away from just the natural brain development of how things are supposed to happen. And I mean, there's really no getting away from it, but there's so many things that we can do now to just get past that and integrate and move on with your life. So
that's awesome. Speaking of this, because I've had a little bit of experience with it, I know there are certain issues and behaviors that are kind of red flags at school. And learning from you, I realized that a lot of it has to do with lack of brain integration. So can you guys tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what about lack of focus in school? What is that related to?
Well, there's a lot of things that can attribute to the lack of focus. But definitely when we look at the overall brain, if we look at the early centers of the brain, they're going to give us a lot of information of how the brain is organized or disorganized. And so when we have a lack of focus, that's a symptom. But if we look at it a little bit more deeper, it's going to translate into possibly not having certain functions available to us. So for example, if I'm constantly in fear mode, it could be that the pons, one of the early parts of the brain that's supposed to be developed before we get upright, never really got its full development. And so then everything is going to be perceived by the brain as threatening. And so then how can I focus if I'm in constant fear mode about anything? And it could be as simple as, it's time to take a test. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's like that puts the body and the brain into that hypervigilant anxiety mode. Can't focus.
And so you're saying the developing of the pons happens like before you start walking. What can we do now to develop that pons?
Well, there's a lot. There's very, very simple movements that we can absolutely go back and rewire, actually reorganize the brain so that we can acquire all those functions. That's just one of them. There's like so many other functions that need to be available to us. And by doing simple movements, we're able to completely reorganize the brain and rewire it to its fullest potential so we can be at our best.
That is so awesome. And that is such great news for people, like for instance, I wrote here that have writing difficulties, right? Reading difficulties, any difficulties at school really that we just slap some labels on sometimes are really remedied by doing some brain work, right? And rewiring.
What about like fidgeting or kids that are super hyperactive? I know like diagnosis for ADD or ADHD is really risen tremendously. Is that also brain issues?
Definitely. That is just the brain constantly trying to figure out how do I compensate for what's not automatic. So like Alma mentioned, if I don't have my pons or my midbrain totally developed, I have to make up with it using my cortex. And when I fidget and move, that helps me be able to pay attention because that's activating the vestibular system, which is a whole other thing that we need to know about. And then the proprioceptive system, which is another thing we need to learn about, because then we're like, why is this child struggling and they're constantly moving? And the crazy thing is that we always tell them to stop moving.
Right, to sit still. Because in our world we think he's fidgeting, he can't possibly be paying attention. And he's not up here, locking eyes with me. And so stop moving and pay attention.
Right, and then he goes, oh great, now what? Oh gosh, I can't think anymore. And that's when they're not paying attention.
Okay, well what's the difference between that and a kinesthetic learner?
there's different types of learners, obviously, and kinesthetic needs to be in the motion of doing. I think most of us are kinesthetic and need to actually do it to really grasp it and learn it. But then there's the kiddo who doesn't look like they're paying attention. They're like out here looking over here because it's easier to pay attention.
They're falling out of their chair.
Falling out of their chair. So that's like, I think there are some differences, and there's definitely some showstoppers for some people. But if you're in homeschool, stand up. Right. Move, right? You don't have to follow those rules that the mainstream kiddos have to follow.
Yeah.
What about like humming, constant noise making? I know my child is a hummer. I know one of your kids is a hummer.
Yes.
That actually has to do with the midbrain. So the midbrain allows us to be able to intake our environment and prioritize information. And so if it's not completely developed, then I can't do that. So if too much is happening, if too much stimuli is coming in, I can't separate it. So if I hum, it's gonna give me that white noise, so that then I can actually calm my system down a little bit more. But the only problem is that if I'm humming, I'm soothing myself, I'm doing what I need to do for my brain, but your midbrain might be like, you know what, that's too much for me, stop doing that. So it's like profiles, they bounce off each other, and so then, yeah.
So you're compensating for yourself and helping you think, but you're distracting others at the same time.
Right.
Exactly.
So what kind of tips can you give homeschool moms, you know, how to deal with these behaviors? Obviously, our suggestion is that you come see them because you need a whole, you know, every child is so unique and each profile is so different, and there are so many layers, right, and underlying factors. So, but what kind of just quick, simple, practical tips can you give our viewers and our homeschool moms to use in their everyday learning?
So that's one of the reasons why we decided to do a website where we could put tools for families and people that they can just access it. So one of them is called PACE. There are 5 movements that integrate the body and integrate the brain and then connect it together. And in doing these 5 movements, it really puts the brain in a readiness to learn whatever it is that you're going to do. So if you just take 3 to 4 minutes before you do a lesson, the body and the brain they're going to be just more optimal to learn. So that's one. So just go to the website, Alma Integration, and download the PDF that's going to explain it. And then there's a claymation video that's 3 minutes and 27 seconds. And I think it's a really cool video because this kid that made it, he's actually my son. He's 25 now, but when he was 3 years old, a couple of doctors actually suggested I would put him in an institution because he was really, really underdeveloped. He was really severely autistic. And so all of this work has really shifted how his brain is able to then function. So not only did he do the claymation aspect of it, but it's his voice. And he didn't speak until he was like 6.
Wow, that's awesome. What a great story.
That's so great.
The other is, there's a movement that's called the lazy 8. So it's an infinity sign, and you basically just start in the middle, and you go up to the left, and then you go up to the right. So it's an 8 laying on its side. Doing that brings in the left and the right side of the brain, so that then they're connected. So when you're going to read, you need both sides. When you're going to do anything, you really need to do it. But the best thing, try it out, that right before you're going to take a test, you do a lazy 8. And so that then they're going to really be able to show how much they've learned versus the test and see how it goes. As soon as you say test, doesn't that put you in the back of the brain?
Right.
And so that you really can't see how much they've really learned.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
We do lazy 8s before handwriting. And then the other day I tried because I was talking to somebody and I kept losing my train of thought. And I was like, what is going on? And I started doing the lazy 8s and then it came back. So it's pretty powerful. Try it out.
Totally.
And we'll have some links in the description for you to look at.
Yeah, what I love is that these tips are good for the kids, but the parents can use the tips too, right?
Yes, everybody. And you said one of your oldest clients is
72.
72.
72, so it's never too late, guys. Oh, it's so awesome. Well, you mentioned your son, and they said he was severely autistic. And my daughter was diagnosed with autism too when she was 3, and then she had the label removed. Dani was there to witness that, which was pretty awesome at school.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on these labels? You know, we have a lot of labels lately, especially at school. I find that more and more kids have IEPs and labels. You know, this kid has ADHD, this one has just ADD, this one has autism, dyslexia even. So what are your thoughts on these labels?
We personally think that you can, I mean, for us, it's like you can keep the label, throw it away, whatever. I mean, it doesn't really define who you are. We're looking at it from a brain perspective, where we say, hey, if these two parts of the brain, the pons and the midbrain, didn't get enough of what they needed in the first year of life, let's go back and reorganize it. And then we tend to see, like what you experienced, that the labels come off. Because it's just trying to make sense of why is this child or why is this adult behaving this way. So it's not like it's a cancer cell where we're looking at it under a microscope. It's looking at what they're doing in their everyday life to kind of function and how they compensate and how they can just get through the day. And so that's where the labels come in, because then it helps people kind of wrap their head around, okay, now I can focus on this. But we kind of see it as like putting them in a box and saying this is all you're ever going to be, and then there's no chance for them to really break through and grow from it. So we don't really look at labels. We don't really care what label you have. We look at what the brain's doing. And then we say, okay, let's go from there. Because that's tangible. We can say, let's change that. And the brain can change. It's amazing what can happen.
And I think that's really important, because I remember as a mom, when I was given that label, I remember I had to make a choice. And I remember going back and forth in fear of like, am I in denial? You know, does my daughter really have this? Am I in denial? Or if I accept it and move on, am I giving up on her? It was really, really emotional. And so to find, you know, you guys was really such an answer to prayer for me, because I was like, I don't have to accept it. And it doesn't mean I'm in denial. You know, we can do something about it. Yeah. And I think that the label really affects the entire family, because at that point, it's like everything that happens, well, it's because
you feed into it.
Yeah, from our perspective, we don't necessarily, like she said, I agree with what she said about the labels. I think the only thing though that happens is that once we get a label, as society goes, then there is that ceiling that's put. And there's something that's called mirroring neurons. So if I see this child that has this limitation, then that child's going to perceive itself as I am limited to only this. And then from a parent's perspective, if we see a child that, oh my gosh, he has a learning disability or this or that, whatever you want to call it, then that makes us it gives us an inability to really parent. Because then we're like, okay, I can't discipline this way, I can't discipline. So there's like fine lines all around that we really need to be cautious of.
That's a good point. I was really impressed when Ximena told me about that discipline was one of the first things that she was told was so important. And I have seen where parents that have labels, they might treat their kids, let them get away with stuff that I would never let my kids get away with. But I think the fear of the label and all of that keeps them from really parenting. And discipline is so important in parenting for all kids.
Absolutely. And then it's sending a message. And it's like, oh, well, you're not really worth whatever because you can get away with it. Because then it internalizes into the subconscious of like, well, I can get away with this, but then it has an effect on the siblings too that can't. It's like, well, why can't I get away with that? And then it just turns into this whole subconscious thing of like, how do I process what's going on? Yeah. So we're big into like the accountability piece. We set up a structure, we give them the parameters of like, this is what we hope that you're gonna do right now, and then we have like, this is what will happen if that doesn't happen. And then that helps everybody grow, because then you know what to do to follow through in your cortex, you already set it up, right? And then they know what's expected of them. So then they know, okay, this is what it is, and then they can learn from that.
But that's so freeing and empowering for parents, because they're not operating out of fear or am I expecting too much of my kid, or am I, reaching for the impossible. You're actually treating them normal, which is what they want to be treated like, right? And then at the same time, it empowers parents to discipline the right way and to have correct expectations versus fearful ones.
Absolutely.
And I will say, it is hard to parent when your child is constantly in their pawns and their survival brain. So I wouldn't say to hold your child accountable without doing all these other things, because then it would be really frustrating. Because then you are just going to be literally stuck in the house all the time, because you won't be able to leave if you're putting these situations up and saying, here's the expectation, and they can't meet it because of where their brain's at, then that's not fair. So that's how we kind of help ease them into, here's where your brain's at, this is what's appropriate. It's kind of like when you have a child, you're not going to say like a 6-month-old can do what a 1-year-old can do.
Right.
You know? So that's where it is important to know that the brain does play a big role in all of that.
And so you work with the entire family.
Yes, everyone.
That's very important.
That's the most important part.
That is, and see, when I first started working with my kids, I was doing the brain work and all these other therapies at the same time, but I was doing it with them, and that was like the most amazing thing, because in doing the work as a subsequent benefit, I changed. My profile changed. Things that I didn't even realize that I was compensating for. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so much easier now. But I thought I was helping my kids. So we only work with a whole entire family, because if we all shift as a family, then we all benefit and we can support each other so much more.
That's awesome. I actually am a witness to that. I did 6 months work with Dani, and I used to be terrified of the dark. At 30. Something. I'll admit it now, okay? I always thought there was a serial killer behind me. And I don't anymore. And that's amazing. And there were other things, like I stopped bumping into walls. I started bumping in, so I probably need to freshen up. But I stopped bumping into walls. I stopped getting car sick. A lot of things like that I definitely was able to function better. So what is the prime age to do this brain work?
We say now.
Yeah, now. Anytime. Once the child is upright, until we're here on Earth, so still breathing, yes.
There's no
All right.
age limit.
Is there any certain kids where maybe it's just too late? You work with any kid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And any adult.
And any adult.
Yes.
Yeah. A 72-year-old.
Well, and there's another part of it. This is the neuro aspect of it, and the other part is called the Rewire, which is that it's a modality that we look into our subconscious beliefs. Because we're only 5% conscious throughout our day. We think like we're like here, but most of the time we're not. We're on autopilot, which means our subconscious is the one that's really driving the boat. And so if we have good programs, which we do, like, we're sitting down, that's a program. All the digestive system and our body functions, standing, walking, all these are automatic functions that are actually programs that are in our subconscious. So if we have good programs, fantastic. But if we don't, we then get limited by those subconscious beliefs constantly. And we sabotage ourselves in our life to never be able to pass those lines. So for example, I was a very mischievous kid. And my mom, every time she'd see me do something, she's like, are you kidding? What made you think of doing that? And so something simple, right? How many of us have said that? I've said that too, without knowing. But what that says to the subconscious is that there's something wrong with me. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. And up until age 7 or 8, that's when we get the most programs downloaded to our life. And so we look at what is really holding us back. So for me, because my kids had so many challenges as they grew, and then they started shifting, if I saw even just a remote tip of something that looked like their old behavior, my whole emotion would go back to, oh my gosh, this is never going to end. And it was terrifying. So then the more that then I was able to rewire for me to be living in the moment, I was then able to take care of whatever was at hand in the most optimal way that I could, versus in fear mode, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, what's going to happen, and we're never really taking it as it really should.
Yeah, it was so great to hear about this at your workshop. And I know you have another workshop coming up, right?
Yes.
When is that?
It's January 13th at Mary Birch.
I know this is a short interview. You're not going to get a whole lot, but you can check these ladies out at their workshop. We'll put the description and the info down below.
You don't want to miss that, January 13th.
Really good. And do you do one-on-one coaching, or how do you work with families?
So we do a package of 8 sessions, and in that we work with the whole family, and we do the neuro aspect and the rewiring aspect, and we put it together. We meet you where you're at. So we kind of tailor it, deciding like, oh, maybe they need more neuro, maybe they need more of that, and we go from there. And then we put you into our group sessions after once you finish that first 8 rounds.
Oh, okay.
So it's all individual, family-based, meeting you where you're at, and then going from there.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and we had a blast with our kids. And just, you don't want to miss their workshop, and we'll revisit this because this is just too good and too important. So we want to hear from you. Comment below, what are some of the challenges that you have in your classroom? They may be related to brain integration. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Share this video with other moms, and maybe moms who have children with labels. This would be great information for them. Subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.